as usual, and I think they're trying to head that off. But they've also put out, of course, the 5-point plan. They say we want all of these trigger points to be ticked off before we will do anything or change anything. And they're showing that they're pretty much ticking all of them off. And so that's why next week they're saying we're going to announce these various measures which will be the beginning of a de-escalation of the lockdown.
I noticed the 5 points. The fifth one seemed to change halfway through the week. And it did originally say we don't want a second wave under any circumstances, and now it says something about a second wave that would overwhelm the NHS, which seems to be slightly different.
Yes, I think that they were concerned that a second wave is not the same as a second wave that does unparalleled damage to the country. For instance, if we had an outbreak of the common cold, everyone has said, well, we've had an outbreak of the common cold. There'd be a second wave if you did what we've done and then allowed everyone out and everyone started catching the common cold again. It wouldn't paralyse the country. On the other hand, if you ended up with a second wave of a virus that had the potential and did cause enormous amounts of medical problems because we couldn't cope with it, that's a different matter. And I think that's why they qualified that, because there was a danger that they would fail, whatever. Because we know if you do anything, and based on the experiences of, say, Hong Kong, the experiences of Singapore, Germany to a certain extent, that when you de-escalate from these measures, you re-establish chains of transmission that the virus can run through. It's like a conduit that the virus can run through. We're all connected up, and the closer we place ourselves to each other, the more likely it is to spread. And therefore, there was a very realistic chance that we will, or there is a very realistic chance we're going to see another peak. I mean, a peak's a peak, doesn't matter how big it is, does it? But therefore, by adding that additional definition of peak that's sufficient to overwhelm the NHS, I actually think I don't think they're being weaselly and crafty. I think that's not an unreasonable qualification to allay fears, actually.
Sure, because really, however tiny, there's almost inevitably going to be a second wave of some kind.
Correct.
It's just they don't want a massive one like we've had, or even worse, because in fact the NHS wasn't overwhelmed. So, well, that makes sense. Now, in terms of what he could possibly announce, I presume it will be a very gradual process, but what kind of measures? I mean, we've been reading reports today about things like reducing the 2 meters to 1 meter. Will that make sense?
Yes, the reason for this is that other countries don't have 2 meters. They use 1.5 meters. The World Health Organization says 1.5 meters. There's data in support of 1.5 meters. There is not evidence and data to support 2 meters. It was a sort of arbitrary number. People thought, well, there is evidence for this number. There's evidence for long-term exposure to people, 15 minutes, long-term exposure in a room. We've actually got data on that. We don't have data for any of the other stuff. So this is more of a retreat towards what we can say is evidence-based practice. So that, again, seems reasonable, and it means it's a bit more practical. People standing in long lines for supermarkets 2 meters apart in the fresh air is probably overkill. People who are crowded into a tube train, on the other hand, because we de-escalate the lockdown and they're all breathing and coughing over each other, that's a different matter. So I think it's more about kind of, let's bring us online with what other countries are doing, because they've got evidence and we already have the science to support that. And I think that's probably why they're changing these things, just to put us into a state that is a bit more consistent. The thing is, probably going to be enormous surge in sales of sticky tape now, because everywhere I go has got sticky tape all over the floor to sort of guide people how to stay a certain distance apart. Presumably someone's going to have to get their 1.5 meter ruler out and relay all that sticky tape now. It's going to be a real pain for some people.
And how would it work in transport then? Because, there are already tube trains that are too crowded, and people are not 2 meters apart, not even 1 meter apart. And if people start going back to work more regularly, go out more, then we're going to have really crowded trains, really crowded buses. Is there any way around that?
Well, I was pretty gobsmacked, to be honest with you, when all this first kicked off. And the first thing that the tube train people did was to cut the number of services. So the people who were having to still go to work ended up under higher density than they would have done if they had just not been in lockdown, which was just a nightmare. It was ridiculous. So I think they have restored that to a certain extent. The thing is, this is going to be a major headache. I was talking to David Willits, our former Science and Universities Minister, about a week ago, and he pointed out the same thing that Michael Leary pointed out, with Michael Leary, the chief exec of Ryanair, that we're facing a really big struggle here, because we're being told the only way to break the chain of transmission is you've got to put people apart from each other. If you have to rope off every other seat on an aeroplane, or every other seat on the London Underground or on the Overground, you've got a real headache there, because we've got a certain amount of rolling stock, there's a certain number of seats on the train, and we need those trains, and they run pretty full at the best of times. So where are we going to magic up basically 100% more trains? We can't just do that overnight. So this is not something we're going to be able to do an instant. There's no instant solution. What I think probably will happen, and I don't think this is necessarily going to be a bad thing. I think, as one person put it, is this the death of the rush hour? I think that basically we're all going to have to get used to 9 o'clock comes and not everyone's at their desk. And actually, I think some people will welcome that. My teenage children will definitely welcome it. But and I'm not a morning person either. So I think probably staging how we travel, when we travel, when we come in, when we go home. Maybe we'll all have to be a bit more flexible about what the working day is and when we work and where we work, in order to mean that what we do have in terms of rolling stock and transport facilities don't become overwhelmed. They are safe to use. And I think that could, if we play our cards right, translate actually into more of a pleasant experience for all of us, not a worse one.
What do you think of this idea of taking your temperature before you go out to work if you're a commuter? Check first.
Well, good job you said temperature, not blood pressure, because when I've tried to get on the train to people with that being a very bad idea. But in terms of temperature, well, it's one thing you can do, it's one marker, but it's not a very good one, to be honest with you. We know that quite a few people who've had coronavirus. In fact, I know of a doctor that had coronavirus infection. He didn't have a fever once. So that's maybe possible as a screen. It will probably root out some of the cases. I don't think it's a very sensitive marker for coronavirus, but birds of a feather flock together, and lots of these viruses all spread in the same way, and there are other viruses that do give you a temperature. So taking your temperature before you go out might be a good way to avoid inflicting whatever seasonal infection you've got, regardless of what it is, on your workmates, and that might be a good idea. But it's not one of those things that you're going to pin all your hopes on, because it's just not sensitive enough as a marker, and it ignores the fact that people don't have a temperature necessarily when they're first infectious. They might be shedding virus, they might be capable of infecting people, they may not have a temperature at that time.
So in reality, how far away are we looking at some possible medical solution to this, or the virus just dying away, as opposed to just having to socially distance and come up with more and more ingenious ways of keeping us apart?
Well, it's never going to fizzle away. This one has proved that. And the reason I say that is, unlike its ancestor and relative SARS, which circulated in 2002 to 2003, that wasn't very infectious. So it produced very dramatic symptoms and was easy to spot and was easy to stamp out. So we got rid of it when it had only got to, and I say only cautiously, but only 5,000 people caught that. About 700 people died. That said, this one, very different ballgame. It's very infectious, gets around very well, and it causes asymptomatic infection in a lot of people. And that's its amazing ability, because it can hide in plain sight. You don't even know you've got it half the time, which makes it very easy for it to spread. And that's why it's such a major headache to deal with this. Vaccines, well, we're not going to know about that for a long time. It's going to take the Oxford team, who are doing one of the vaccine trials, and probably the other people around the world. There are many projects developing vaccines. They're not going to know until probably the autumn, our autumn, whether or not this is actually going to work or not. And then the real job begins of scaling it up. There are nearly 8 billion people on Earth, and it is not trivial to get a vaccine into every single one of them. And this is not something that's going to be solved overnight, regardless of whether the vaccine works. And then the whole drug question, well, we don't have any drugs at the moment that fight this virus specifically. Making a new drug from scratch takes a really long time, a decade on average, so we don't have that amount of time either. And then there's the whole kind of, can we repurpose a drug that we've already got? Can we take something off the shelf and by chance it happens to have a side effect that combats this virus? People are aggressively looking for that. No magic bullets there yet either. And then there are some bespoke antiviral drugs like remdesivir, which has been in the news this week because a small trial in America has suggested that it might reduce the period that people are unwell. It didn't statistically significantly affect the mortality rate of people who are really unwell, but that might kind of load the dice a bit in our favour, but it certainly wouldn't stop people ending up laid low in the first place. So there is no other major option apart from public health manoeuvres like social distancing at the moment, and that's why the government are pursuing that, I think.
So we're going to be looking realistically at some kind of new normal, a new way of life for at least a year, probably much longer.
I think it's dawn chorus every day now, and I heard a cuckoo. First time in 47 years, first time in 40 years, I think, I've heard a cuckoo. Because it's quiet, and nature is changing, we're changing. There are fewer cars. The headline today is 11,000 fewer people have died across Europe since this all began because of the lockdown. Why? Because there's far less pollution, and pollution kills people. So you've got to knock 11,000 deaths off the death toll from coronavirus because we haven't killed them with pollution. It's a pretty obtuse comparison, but you can see where I'm going with it. So we need to be thinking about, well, you know, that there are not all negatives here. What do we want to do to make life that people are seeing in some respects as nicer in some regards? Can we keep those nice bits and go back to having the other, or get rid of the nasty bits?
Thank you very much indeed. Dr. Chris Smith joining us, who presents the Naked Scientists, a virologist at University of Cambridge. What's your view on all of this? 0345 6060 973. More calls coming. 6:30 on LBC. Let's get the latest news headlines with Lucinda Horsley.
The government's announced extra help for charities supporting victims of domestic abuse and modern slavery. It's ring-fenced £76 million so that services can provide temporary accommodation and telephone support services. A further 621 people have died with coronavirus in the UK. The latest figure includes those who have passed away in hospitals, care homes and the wider community. It takes the total number of COVID-19 related deaths here to more than 28,000. The Spanish Prime Minister has announced that face masks will be mandatory on public transport from Monday. Adults and older children have been allowed to exercise outdoors in the country for the first time today in 50 days. And the weather, any showers dying out to leave a chilly night with clear spells for many central parts. Cloudier in the northeast and southwest with some patchy rain. A low of 2 degrees in parts of Scotland and 8 degrees in southern England.
LBC.
Across the nation, we've been discovering loads of new ways to get moving around the home. Why not join in? Join
because I support people in the charity, so I'm actually supporting other people, younger people that are shielding.
Okay.
So,
And how do you feel about where we are now then, and possible
I think-
easing?
taking the medical advice that I've heard from experts, and I'm not talking about people on social media or the TV, I'm talking about actually talking to people that are in the front line of the NHS. I think we were too late locking down. I think that the GBP, the Great British Public, probably 85% of people are listening and 15% aren't. And the danger is, in my view, that if we lift, people hear the word lift lockdown and think everything's back to normal, as you said. I suspect that in the coming weeks, people will flaunt it more. I suspect there'll be slight lockdowns, which I'll listen to. And I'll make a prediction that I think that if you and I have a conversation 4 weeks today, Clive, the health service will be overwhelmed and we will have to go into a second longer lockdown because we just don't have the disciplines that, for instance, the Germans or people in Singapore, if you look at the countries, or New Zealand, if you look at the countries that have quashed this virus properly and actually gone to zero transmission, we've got the highest death rate per capita today, highest death rate per capita in the world. We had 6,200 new infections yesterday. It's 4 times anything else in Europe.
Despite the fact that we are in lockdown, so is that because we're not following the rules? Is it because the government has made the lockdown too late and too relaxed? What do you think? What do you put that down to?
I think it's too little too late. Of course, the increase in testing, as there will be a delta between the number of tests and the number of new transmissions, because if you increase the testing delta, you will find more people. That's a natural progression between the two numbers. But we're very much in League 3 of a football league. We're not in the Premiership, and we're certainly not a top 5 club in terms of the way we're looking after our people and we're controlling this disease. I just feel that we should at least be in lockdown. I mean, my lockdown, Clive, from a personal point of view, as a high-risk patient, the same as anyone else listening to this who's in my group, there's 1.6 million of us. We're in lockdown until 17th of June at a minimum, and that still means not going outside our front door. So when I listen to people, well, it's getting a bit difficult, I only get out an hour and a half a day, you know, get real. This disease is killing a lot of people, and unless we stick to the rules and unless we enforce lockdown over a longer period, I suspect the government will make as much of a horror of this as they have in the whole crisis. And I think in 4 weeks' time, as I said, I'd love to ring you or make a note in the diary, and I hope I'm wrong, but I think we'll be heading towards the second wave.
Right, okay, Steve, thank you. Let's hope you are wrong, but I understand what you're saying. If people misread the announcements, if they start thinking it doesn't matter anymore, it effectively is lifting the lockdown rather than easing it. I mean, I think the government is right to talk about phase 2. No longer anything about exit strategies or ending the lockdown. It's just phase 2. It's just another kind of lockdown, really. 0345 6060 973 is the number. More calls in a moment. This is LBC 645.
From hospital staff to cleaners, from shop workers to frontline carers, we at LBC want to thank all the key workers during this time.
I honestly can't thank the NHS enough. The gratitude you have for them. They put themselves on the line day in, day out, and some of them you can see that they're scared themselves. Honestly, I literally do owe them my life.
I'd like to say a huge thank you to all the nursery and primary school teachers who are still working to support key worker children. Thank you so much.
The NHS staff are amazing. Before I got to the hospital tower, I was a little scared about giving birth, but they made her feel comfortable and reassured that we need more people like them in the world.
LBC sends our thanks to all of the key workers. Thank you.
The teachers are very supportive.
It encourages creativity.
That's what makes Global Academy unique.
Your future starts here. Visit globalacademy.com.
Across the nation, we've been discovering loads of new ways to get moving around the home. Why not join in? Join the lounge lunging, 1-2 punching, and the star jumping while the spaghetti's on the hob. Don't let that water boil over. Join the impromptu dance parties happening over the phone, and the just 5 more minutes of playing astronauts and aliens in the garden. flips, the leg lifts, and the just shaking things out for a bit, happening all across the country. Join the movement. To see how you can get moving, search Stay In, Work Out.
If you want to do something important, work in adult social care.
I'm Georgia. I love social care because you never know what each day will bring. The thing that I would say to anybody that was thinking about a job in social care is go for it.
We are recruiting in your local area. We need you now, and they need you always. Care for others. Make a difference. Today. Search adult social care jobs now.
It's time for some truth. Time to settle once and for all that nagging doubt about whether you've been missold. If you've lost money on a stocks and shares ISA or investment bond sold by a bank as a claims management company, Goodwin Barrett could get to the truth and deliver you compensation. You could do all this yourself and refer to the Financial Ombudsman for free, but there are so many other things you may want to do with your time. So text GOOD to 78900. That's GOOD to 78900. Time for some truth.
This is LBC, leading Britain's conversation with Clive Bull.
LBC, I'm Clive Bull. We're talking about the easing of the lockdown. What should Boris Johnson be announcing next week? Do you want to see it eased in some way or carry on regardless? And is it being ignored? Just before we go back to the calls, here are some of the texts. First one, anonymous. After the surge in virus death figures, now finally including care homes in the daily report, sorry is the only word that should be uttered at this press briefing. Ron says, toy shops are the most essential shops. Parents don't enjoy spoiling their kids anymore. I do. Besides, I'm probably enjoying it more than them. Well, yes, I wouldn't say they're essential, to be honest. I know you're a fan, clearly, Ron, but it's clearly not that essential because most toy shops aren't doing very good business. And I think maybe that will change. I'm not sure it will. I think they'll probably all be closing down, and toys such as they are, maybe adult toys of jigsaws, things that grown-ups want to play with as well. I know so many people doing jigsaws at the moment. Maybe that sort of thing, but they're going to buy them online, surely. Rosh says, Clive, golf courses should open soon, I hope. Very easy to socially distance, out in the open, great exercise. It makes so much sense to open them soon. Alan in West Hampstead, I do not feel very comfortable about any relaxation of the lockdown measures. I'm a trader at the Portobello Market, which attracts thousands of tourists. The virus would spread like wildfire if it reopens with a relaxation of the measures. That's why I will now start selling on the internet. I've got no other choice. Right, back to the calls. And Jay, hello Jay.
Hello Clive, how you doing?
Not bad, what would you like to say?
Yeah, I just want to talk about this social distancing, yeah? Basically, I've been out in Romford today. I don't see no one respecting the social distancing, yeah? For example, I went into, Sainsbury's today.
Yeah.
And everyone, just to the Sainsbury's staff, so you've got police officers standing right next to me.
Really? Not doing the 2 metre? Really?
I'm with the missus, yeah? Tuesday night I go, she goes, she starts moaning one fucking towards me, I don't know, yeah? So I just kept quiet, but that's what's going on. Yeah?
Well, you wanted to go up and say you should be social distancing?
Basically, I was in the queue with a line bar, yeah, behind the lines, and they basically come and stand right next to me, on the other side, right next to me, about, I don't know, a few inches away.
Yeah. So
they'll be showing people the right way, aren't they?
Yeah, yeah.
And example, the staff, Sainsbury's staff, exactly the same thing, right? They walk straight past you. Even though if you move away, they can see you want to move away from them, and they move closer to you.
Well, it's interesting you say that, Jay. I've read a lot of things on Twitter this week, people complaining about exactly the same thing. In supermarkets, people are taking no notice, including the staff. Do you think that is because the government is not sending out the right message?
Well, the government has not sent any right messages ever since we've started this epidemic, you know? It's always been like, they say one thing, then they do another. It's the same thing with the masks. They said they're no good, now they're good.
Well, Yes, I tend to agree. They've been a little bit all over the place with masks, and they clearly are gradually changing their tune. I think that was because they didn't have enough masks, but it wasn't a clear message, I agree. Jay, thank you very much. Do you agree with Jay? People not observing the lockdown, it might as well not be there at the moment. Clearly it's a minority, but there are a lot of people. I've just got another text here. Tony in Greenwich says, I was surprised today to see an ice cream van selling ice cream in my street. That can't be right. Well, what do you think? Clearly there is some relaxation going on, whether the government encourage it or not. So, do you feel comfortable about that? Alice in Oldham. Hello, Alice.
Hello.
Hi. What would you like to say?
Hello?
Yes, what would you like to say?
Yeah, I'm just really thinking about the potential reopening of schools. I know there's quite a lot of pressure at the moment about getting kids back to school, and as a teacher, obviously we're desperate to get the kids back in education as soon as we can. I think from a sort of logistical point of view, it's going to prove extremely difficult because of the overcrowded nature, particularly of secondary schools in the area where I work. We have a school that was built for 800